We start out the Impact report with some good news for TNA this week for a change. Actually, two very good news items. Number one, this week's Genesis edition of Impact was way up from the week before. Did over 1.5 million viewers. Its best number in a year since last January. So doing a pay-per-view live and free on Spike TV finally pays off for them. I don't have the quarter-hour breakdowns. I'm very curious to see which segments did the best. I would think Sting's possible final match in TNA would have been a draw, but I don't know. It's too bad, good ratings don't correlate to good quality programming, because this week's show is only slightly better than the garbage they gave us last week. We'll get to Impact in a second. The other good news for TNA is that they are no longer homeless, and their new home is the same house they were living in before. They have worked out a deal to return to Universal Studios in Orlando by moving their taping schedule around a little bit. So now they're going to be taping their shows at the end of the week and the weekend, as opposed to in the middle of the week, which is what they have traditionally done. So they've got dates booked through the beginning of May, including an unnamed pay-per-view on April 27th. I've read that it might be Destination X, but nobody knows for sure what that event is going to be. But at least they have some place to tape now, and they won't have to go back out on the road, which was probably going to bankrupt them if they had to. The whole point of getting off the road was because they couldn't afford it. So that could have been a big disaster for the company. So disaster averted, at least until May. So that's good news for TNA. Which brings us to Impact. Genesis, Part 2. Yet another show with way too much Dixie Carter and a shit main event. And in between all of that, we had a really good cage match between Kurt Angle and Bobby Roode. We had a decent, match between Austin Aries and Chris Sabin. I was not impressed. There was nothing else about this Genesis show that made it feel special in any way. It opened with, who else? Dixie Carter, Rockstar Spud, who, I have to say this, Rockstar Spud is actually quite great in his role. I have to admit, he's great in small doses. Not when he's all over the damn show, but I like Spud. And with them was Dixie Carter's attorney. He has to be doing pro bono work for them because there's no way TNA can afford a high-powered attorney. Magnus was also with them. I almost forgot the world champion. The lawyer informs them that someone is planning a hostile takeover of TNA and has been buying up shares for months now. Stop. Okay, let's stop here for a second. Question. Last I checked, TNA was not a publicly traded company. So how then, unless this mystery person is already employed by TNA, and maybe then there's a way that they can be buying up shares, I don't even know. How can someone on the outside be buying up shares of the company right underneath the nose of the owner? How does that even work? That is a legitimate question. I'm listening to this guy talk about shares and all this kind of stuff, and I know WWE is a publicly traded company, and you can buy and sell shares. Like, if I want to turn around and buy a piece of WWE tomorrow, I can do that. With TNA, much like UFC and a lot of these other companies, they're not publicly traded companies. There are no shares that you and I can go out and buy. And how does any of this crap happen without Dixie Carter knowing about it if she's the frickin' owner? It's so stupid. This new investor is already making decisions. He ruled that Sting will have somebody in his corner tonight for the match against Magnus. Magnus said, fine, then I want the match to be no DQ. And the attorney said that he can make that happen. This man seems awfully sure of himself, What, does he have a bat phone that connects directly to this new investor? He's so sure that he can make it happen. So none of this made any sense. This guy who played the attorney was terrible. And what a way to start out their Genesis edition of Impact here. Magnus, Spud, EC3 all came to the ring. Sting came out. He denied knowing who the investor was. He's got one foot out the door. You think he gives a shit who the investor is? Sting got the crowd, the paper champion at Magnus, who slapped Sting across the face. So he got jumped at that point by the rest of the Dixieland bunch until Samoa Joe ran down to make the save. Joe will be in Sting's corner for the main event. Backstage, more Dixie. She wanted Spud to make sure that Joe does not make it to the main event, and her brilliant idea was to put Spud himself in a match with Samoa Joe. A man who has had bigger meals and bigger bowel movements than Rockstar Spud. I thought people were joking when they said this But the more I watch this show, I'm starting to really believe that Dixie is supposed to be, in storyline, is supposed to be the dumbest owner in the history of wrestling. That's the storyline. And what a storyline it is. We had Gunner against James Storm in their briefcase on a pole match. So Gunner won. He maintains his TNA World title shot. The crowd sucked for this, and I have to say they sucked for almost the entire show. Reason being, it was the second taping, and these crowds are notoriously dead for these second tapings, so I felt kind of bad for these guys. Mike Tenay made it clear very early in the bout that the winner had to maintain possession of the briefcase after retrieving it, so they pretty much telegraphed the finish right there. Apparently, the briefcase is now a football, which makes sense, I guess, given that NFL referees have been about as reliable with their calls lately as pro wrestling referees.